In October 2025, archaeologists working in Peru's Nazca region made a discovery that shocked them to their core. We all know the famous 3,000-year-old elongated skulls, but this new find recontextualizes everything. It's not just a few hundred tombs. It's a 5-mile-long site of mass graves linked to 16 previously unknown pyramids. This new elongated skull discovery isn't just a historical footnote, as experts are now realizing it's worse than we thought, pointing to a brutal reality that was systematically buried by the sands of time. Unearthing the Paracas Kings.
Now this is what we call cranial deformation. You can tell the volume of the skull is that of a normal human.
To really grasp why the 2025 discovery is so horrifying, you have to rewind the clock almost a century. The year is 1928. The man is Julio Tello, a name that echoes through South American history. Tello is often called the father of Peruvian archaeology, and for good reason. He was an indigenous Quechua-speaking scholar trained in Europe who returned to his homeland with a fierce determination to uncover its true pre-Inca past. He was drawn to the Paracas Peninsula, a barren, wind-swept stretch of desert about 155 miles south of Lima. This place is one of the driest on Earth. It's a hyper-arid landscape where it almost never rains, which, it turns out, is the perfect environment for preserving the past. Tello wasn't the first to find things there. He was following reports of huaqueros, grave robbers, who were pulling stunning, brightly colored textiles out of the sand and selling them on the black market. Tello knew he had to get there first to save this history from being lost forever. When he arrived and began his formal excavation, what he uncovered was staggering. It wasn't just a few graves. It was a massive, sprawling necropolis, a literal city of the departed, covering over half a square mile. He found more than 400 ancient tombs. Some were simple, but others were massive underground chambers holding dozens of bodies. Tello famously described the site as a museum of mummies. And that's not an exaggeration. The people dating back 3,000 years to what we now call the Paracas culture weren't just skeletons. They were mummies, perfectly preserved by the dry desert air. They were found sitting upright, bundled in layers and layers of cloth. These mummy bundles were like historical treasure chests. The bodies were wrapped with offerings, intricate ceramics, gourds filled with food for the afterlife, and beautiful jewelry made from spondylus shells, a prized red-orange shell imported from as far away as Ecuador. But the thing nobody tells you is just how incredible the textiles were. These weren't just simple wrappings. They were some of the most complex and beautiful textiles ever found from any ancient civilization. We're talking about massive mantles woven from cotton and wool, embroidered with over 200 threads per square inch. To put that in perspective, that is a higher thread count than most modern machine-made luxury bedsheets. They were dyed with brilliant, vibrant colors, cochineal red, indigo blue, and depicted intricate images of felines, birds, and strange mythical beings with serpent-like bodies. This was clearly a sophisticated, wealthy, and powerful culture. But as Tello and his team carefully unwrapped these priceless bundles, they found the real shock. Inside, they found the skulls, over 300 of them. And they were not normal. They were dramatically elongated, stretched upward and backward into a cone-like shape. Some were 25% longer than a normal human skull. Tello was stunned. He had found a lost people who intentionally and dramatically reshaped their bodies. For almost 100 years, the world built a single story around this. These had to be the elites, the nobles, the high priests, the kings. They were buried with honor, with immense wealth, in a sacred place. This bizarre, unnatural shape must have been a mark of ultimate status, a sign that they were closer to the gods. That was the story. That was the safe story. And it's the story that the 2025 discovery just shattered. But how did they even do this? And what were they hiding inside? The price of a strange beauty.
And the forehead and the back of the skull have been flattened. So this is what cranial deformation on the coast of Peru looks like.
How do you make a human skull grow like that? Mainstream science has a straightforward, if unsettling, explanation. intentional cranial modification. And the process is, to put it mildly, intense. It couldn't be done on an adult. It had to start in infancy, just days after the child was born, when the skull's plates are still soft and flexible. Here's how it worked. The baby's head would be bound tightly with cloth wraps, or in a more extreme method, strapped between two flat pieces of wood. This immense pressure, applied constantly day and night for months and even years, would prevent the skull from growing in its normal rounded shape. The brain, which continues to grow, would push outward against the only path it had left, upward. This forced the skull to elongate into that dramatic conical form. Now, many people are crazy about this, but the Paracas weren't the only culture to do this. This was a surprisingly global phenomenon. The Huns in Europe were famous for it, as were the ancient Alans. The Maya in Mesoamerica practiced it. You can even see it in ancient art from civilizations all over the world. Some even point to the famous busts of the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten and his family, with their strangely long heads, as proof of this practice at the highest levels of power. It was the ultimate status symbol, a permanent physical way to mark someone as other, as special, as part of the ruling class. But here's the kicker. The Paracas skulls are different. They aren't just another example of head binding. They are the most extreme and the most anomalous examples ever found. And when scientists really started looking at them, they found physical differences that binding alone cannot easily explain. Get this. First, there's the cranial volume, the amount of space inside the skull. On average, the Paracas' elongated skulls have a cranial volume that is 20 to 25% larger than a normal human skull. We're talking 1,600 to 1,700 cubic centimeters compared to our average of 1,350. Think about that. Binding can reshape a skull, but how can it add that much volume? On top of that, the skulls themselves are up to 60% heavier. That's a lot of extra bone mass. And it gets even crazier. Hold on to your hats for this part. You and I, and every Homo sapien, have a line that runs across the top of our skull from front to back. It's called the sagittal suture. It's the visible seam where the two parietal plates of our skull fused together when we were infants. What many overlooked for decades is that many of the most extreme Paracas skulls do not have this suture. They appear to have a single solid parietal plate. Anatomically, that shouldn't be possible for a normal human. Then there's the foramen magnum. That's the large hole at the base of your skull where your spine connects and your spinal cord enters. In a normal human, it's positioned relatively centrally. In many of the Paracas skulls, this hole is shifted significantly forward and is often smaller than average. These are fundamental structural differences. These are the kinds of anomalies that make you question everything. This isn't just reshaping. This is something else entirely. And this is exactly what lit the fuse for the alien theories. But the weirdness doesn't stop there. One of the most famous skulls, nicknamed Tumba No. 60, was found with a full, intact head of auburn red hair. This is a genetic trait not found in native South American populations. So, who were these red-haired people? This one fact would become the centerpiece of a firestorm. And, get this, some of these skulls show signs of brain surgery. Archaeologists have found dozens of skulls with holes drilled into them, a process called trepanation, likely to relieve pressure, and the bone around the holes shows signs of healing. Their survival rate for this incredibly dangerous procedure 3,000 years ago was over 80%. That's a better survival rate than many hospitals had in medieval Europe. They were sophisticated, they were master surgeons, and their anatomy was in some cases fundamentally different from our own. So, were they aliens? A lost human subspecies? Or was it all just binding? The world needed answers, and the only way to get them was DNA. This is where the story truly goes off the rails. Forster's bombshell results. This is the chapter that breaks the internet. The anatomical anomalies, the added volume, the missing suture, the red hair were so strange that researchers were desperate for one thing: genetic proof. But mainstream archaeology, to put it mildly, was hesitant. They were content with the head binding theory, but Brian Forster wasn't. Forster, the director of the Paracas History Museum and a well-known alternative researcher, is the kind of person who asks the questions no one else dares to. He wasn't satisfied. In 2014, he decided to force the issue. He got permission to take small samples of bone, hair, and skin from 5 of the most anomalous skulls. He then sent these samples to a private genetics lab in Texas for a full DNA analysis. The lab techs had no idea what they were looking at. They ran the tests, and the preliminary results that came back were explosive. The lab reported that the mitochondrial DNA, the DNA passed down only from the mother, contained mutations that were, and this is a direct quote, unknown in any human, primate, or animal known so far. This was the WTF moment heard around the world. The story went viral. This was it, the smoking gun, proof of a non-human entity. Proof of aliens, or a separate human species, a hybrid race living in Peru 3,000 years ago. Proponents of these theories, like L.A. Marzulli, jumped on this, claiming these were the Nephilim, a hybrid race of giants mentioned in the Bible. And it got even weirder. The lab was able to get some matches for the haplogroups, which are like genetic clans that trace our deep ancestry, but they weren't the Native American haplogroups A, B, C, or D that you would expect to find in 99% of all pre-Columbian populations. Instead, they found haplogroup T2b, which is common in Europe. They found U2e, which is found in the Caucasus Mountains and the Middle East. Some even suggested Scandinavian roots. This was impossible. This was historical heresy. It implied that people from Europe and the Middle East, the same red-haired people perhaps, were crossing the Atlantic Ocean, sailing to Peru, and intermingling with the locals thousands of years before Columbus was even born. It was a story that could and would rewrite all of human history. But as you can imagine, the mainstream scientific community was furious. This was a scientific civil war. Skeptics immediately and aggressively struck back. They argued, and they had a very good point, that ancient DNA is incredibly easy to contaminate. These skulls are 3,000 years old. They had been dug up by Tello, handled by huaqueros before him, touched, coughed on, and curated by dozens of museum staff for almost 100 years. Any one of those people could have left their own European DNA on the samples. A single skin cell, one strand of hair, and the entire test is ruined. The unknown mutations, they said, were not alien. They were just degraded DNA. The sequencing machines were trying to read a book that had been shredded into 1,000,000 pieces, and they were just spitting out gibberish. In 2022, a separate study using more advanced STR profiling came to a much more sober conclusion. The profiles were, quote, consistent with modern human populations. And in 2025, updated analyses from the University of California, Santa Cruz seemed to put the final nail in the coffin, confirming 100% human DNA with dominant Andean lineages. Case closed, right? The alien theory was just bad science. Not so fast. The thing nobody tells you is that even the human results are a massive head-scratcher. That auburn red hair, it's real. And those European haplogroups. While some could be contamination, the persistence of these anomalies, like haplogroup H1, which is linked to the Basque people of Europe, keeps the debate alive. So, maybe not aliens, but a lost transoceanic civilization of red-haired sailors. That in itself is a world-changing discovery. The DNA war is far from over, but while everyone was fighting over DNA, they missed the real story, happening right under their noses. A city of 10,000 skeletons. While the scientists and YouTubers were at war over genetics, the real bombshell was about to drop, and it came, once again, from outside the mainstream. The year is 2025. The man is Raul Bilecki, an independent explorer and researcher. Bilecki wasn't digging in the sand at first. He was digging on his computer. He spent years scanning high-resolution satellite imagery from Google Earth, meticulously poring over the remote, uncharted deserts of the Nazca region, not far from Paracas. He started spotting anomalies, geometric shapes, faint outlines, things that just didn't look natural. He saw alignments that pointed directly to the June solstice. Mainstream archaeology, with its limited budgets, had never surveyed this remote area. It was just empty desert, or so they thought. Bilecki, Working with Forster and other researchers, funded his own expedition. He trekked out into the absolute middle of nowhere, into the baking, relentless heat of the Peruvian coast, and he found them. It wasn't just a few mounds. It was an entire undocumented pyramid complex. He found 16 previously unknown pyramids, some with bases carved directly from the bedrock. This was a massive, untouched ritual center, potentially dating back to 1800 BCE, before the Paracas culture even existed. This discovery alone would be enough to rewrite the textbooks. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is what his team found near these hidden pyramids. As they explored the area, they came across a huaquero pit, a looter's hole, then another, and another, and another. They realized this wasn't just a few graves. This was a field of bones. Bielike's footage is the stuff of nightmares. He began to walk the perimeter of the site. He walked for 1 mile, 2 miles, 5 miles. The entire 5-mile stretch was a single, sprawling, continuous mass grave. The ground was littered with human remains, thousands upon thousands of bones scattered by looters, bleached white by the sun. He found mummies, torn open, their 3,000-year-old hair and skin still intact. Priceless masterwork textiles, the same kind Tello found, were flapping in the wind, discarded by the thieves who were only looking for gold. And yes, elongated skulls. They were everywhere, not one or two, but clearly a massive population of them. This is the moment the entire story changed. This is the worse than we thought. Remember Tello's discovery? That was an honorable burial. 400 of the elite, carefully wrapped, buried with treasure in a sacred necropolis. This was a slaughterhouse. This was a dumping ground. Based on the 5-mile density, Bielike and his team estimate this site could hold 10,000 bodies or more. You don't put 10,000 members of your royal elite in a 5-mile-long mass grave. You just don't. This discovery shatters the status symbol theory. It points to something far darker, a massive civilization-ending event, a brutal conflict, a devastating plague, or something else. A ritualistic practice on a scale that archaeologists had never, ever dared to imagine. So what happened here? How do Tello's kings and Bielike's mass grave fit together? The truth was never aliens. This is it. This is the moment. This is where we tie all the threads together and the true horrifying picture finally comes into focus. On one hand, we have the discovery that started it all. Julio Tello back in 1928. He unearths a necropolis, a literal city of the dead, buried beneath the coastal sands of Peru. Inside, he finds a few hundred individuals. Kings, he calls them. Priests. Their skulls are elongated, stretched into impossible conical shapes that defy our understanding of human anatomy. They are buried with immensely valuable, intricate textiles, gold, and obsidian. They are wrapped in ceremony and surrounded by immense honor. This was a civilization that revered its dead elite, or so we thought. On the other hand, we have Dr. Bielike's discovery from 2025, a discovery that changes everything. Bielike's team, following satellite imaging anomalies, finds something that shouldn't exist. It's not a tomb. It's not a necropolis. It is a 5-mile-long dumping ground, a scar in the desert holding a staggering 10,000 bodies. 10,000, and the most horrifying part, mixed among the skeletons of men, women, and children, are countless individuals with those same elongated skulls. How? How can both be true? How can a single culture at the same moment in history treat one group of these unique people as royalty and another as refuse? The thing nobody tells you is that archaeologists have been finding other smaller clues for years, disturbing whispers from the dust that we simply couldn't connect. At a temple site in Puemapi, dating to the exact same period, researchers found a chilling preview. They found the remains of victims who had met a terrible, methodical end. These weren't skeletons carefully placed for the, say, afterlife. They were found with thick, fibrous ropes still wrapped around their necks. Analysis of the bones, the sharp cut marks, told a gruesome story. Their throats had been slit, a deliberate sawing action. In some cases, their chests were cracked open, the rib cages splayed. Their hearts had been removed. This wasn't burial. This wasn't the honor Tello found. This was a brutal, ritualistic offering, a sacrifice, but it was small, just a handful of bodies. Nobody could have imagined it was merely the prototype, the practice run for something thousands of times larger. Now add the final, crucial piece of the puzzle, the motive, the why. And it doesn't come from a tomb, it comes from the sky. Scientists who study ancient weather patterns, paleoclimatologists, have found irrefutable evidence. Right around 1000 BCE, the exact time the civilization was at its absolute peak, the region was struck by a cataclysm, a megadrought, an apocalyptic climate change event that lasted for decades. Imagine it, truly imagine it, a world where the sky turns to brass for years, then decades. The crops wither to black dust. The rivers vanish, leaving cracked, gaping wounds in the earth. Your entire civilization built on agriculture is collapsing. Your people are starving. Your children are dying. You are desperate. In the ancient Andean worldview, a disaster of this scale means only one thing. The gods are angry. The gods who live in the sky and the mountains are thirsty, and they must be appeased. You must give them your most sacred, most precious offering to make the rain return. And what could be more precious? What is the most godlike thing your culture has? The answer is horrifying. It's the people with the elongated skulls. This wasn't just a fashion trend. It was a generational biological project. From the moment of birth, these chosen infants had their heads bound, the soft bones of their skulls deliberately, painfully forced to grow upwards, to look just like the creator god, Viracocha, who was said to have a conical head. They were, quite literally, shaped in the image of their god. This is the final, terrible theory. The worse than we thought is not aliens. It's not a foreign invasion. It's us. It's organized, cold-blooded, systematic human desperation. The Parasas weren't just honoring these people. They were farming them. They were a special, separate class, a divine bloodline, revered in life, yes, but only because they were destined to be the ultimate offering. They were living, breathing sacrifices, raised from birth for one single terrible purpose. Their entire lives, their divine status, their special food, their sacred clothes, it was all just preparing the offering. This wasn't a society that respected them. It was a society that harvested them. And suddenly, the two discoveries make perfect, terrible sense. Tello's discovery, that was the royal crypt. That was the resting place for the breeder population, the kings and queens, the purebloods, whose sacred duty was to produce these godlike children. They were the ones who were safe, the ones who were honored in death. But Bieliki's 5-mile-long grave, that is the result. That is the harvest. That is the final desperate ritual, an offering of 10,000 souls to the thirsty sky in a single, massive, apocalyptic event to stop the drought and save their world. And here's the final tragic irony, the ultimate twist. It didn't work. Imagine the silence after the slaughter, the thousands of priests, their hands bloody, staring at the brass sky, waiting and waiting and waiting. But the rains didn't return. The drought continued. The civilization collapsed anyway. They had sacrificed their gods, their children, their entire holy class for nothing. All that was left was a field of bones, a few hidden pyramids, and a 3,000-year-old warning buried by the sands. A warning about what happens when the world breaks and faith demands the unthinkable. Until now, were these skulls a mark of honor or a horrific sign of a predestined end? Let us know your theory below. Like and subscribe for more secrets hidden from history.